Good afternoon, Bilahari, and thank you so much for being here these last 2 days. I think one of the things I really was interested when I invited you to come and speak at the Europe Forum was I wanted Europe to understand a little bit of how Asia looks at Europe. And I didn't want it to come from an Indian person, actually. So
Okay.
it was good. It was
Uh,
that's one reason I dragged you out of Singapore.
okay. It's no great hardship to come to India. So
I know.
thank you for inviting me. I was very interested. I was more interested than I expected to be in
Thank
the
you.
content of this seminar, and
Yeah,
I learned a lot.
thank you.
I had not quite realized um, the depth of India's defense relationship with Europe,
Yeah.
and and the potential for developing it further.
Mhm.
So I'm looking forward to the session later,
Yes.
and I'll leave after that
Yes.
about the defense industry.
Yes.
Um, I think the developing relationship between Europe and India, which has been manifest in this so-called mother of all agreements
Deals.
or deals,
Mm.
which, I think there's a reason why it was 20 years in the making. It was stalled for quite a number of years, and then it came together, not perfectly, but substantively in a very short period of time. And I think that reason is that there has been a fundamental reordering of the world, not as fundamental as the more alarmist people think. Global order is not collapsing, but it's certainly being reshuffled. And the catalyst is a much more assertive or aggressive China,
Mm.
and a much more transactional America
America.
that has decided to define its interests more narrowly.
Correct.
I think that has caused all of us to reorientate ourselves. I think for countries like India and Singapore, which have been always formally non-aligned and always tried to follow omnidirectional foreign policies, not cutting off any channel, whether we agree or not, right? Uh, it's been easier for us to adapt to this world
Yes.
than, say, Europe.
Yes.
As I think I mentioned in a panel, and I just told somebody over lunch, look, Europeans got an enormous shock over Ukraine when Americans changed their policy over Ukraine. But I told them, we have had an analogous shock half a century ago.
Yeah.
When the Americans decided that the war in Vietnam is not
Yes.
worth its candle,
Yeah.
and decided to go, right? Leaving, South Vietnam, royalist Cambodia, royalist Laos to their fates. And it wasn't a pretty fate. So since that time, I think almost all of Asia, including US allies like Japan or South Korea, although they cannot be as vocal about it as formerly non-aligned countries like Singapore, have always dealt with the US on the basis of common interests, not this illusion of having common values. Now, we do share some values, but even when we share values, our interpretation may not be the same.
That's right.
Right?
That's
As I was telling somebody this morning, whenever I hear somebody use the word rules-based order, which I believe in and you believe in, but I always ask myself, and I wouldn't be surprised if you ask yourself the same thing, whose rules, which
rules?
interpretation of those rules, and
Yes.
for what purpose?
Yes.
Right?
Absolutely.
Because rules, international law, these are not autonomous realities. They are instruments
Indeed.
which countries use or not use in order to advance their interests.
That's right.
So I think what we are seeing now is not really world disorder, although the world has, since when has the world not been orderly,
Of course.
right? Disorderly, right? Since when has there been no war? What we are seeing really is after a very short, exceptional period of world history, the immediate post-Cold War period, right? We are seeing a reversion to the historical norm,
Yeah.
right? We have dealt with it before, all of us. In fact, all of us have not merely dealt with it in the sense of surviving, but we have prospered under it. So if we get into the right frame of mind, and the right frame of mind is not to mistake that exceptional period for the norm, there's no reason why we cannot navigate this successfully
Yeah.
and continue to prosper.
Yeah.
Certainly, India has got a very great opportunity I'm not saying everything is going to be rosy for everybody, Singapore or India or any other country. But we've seen this movie before and we have survived it. So why can't we do it again?
I wanted to sort of
Yeah,
get your perspective also on how do you think, I mean, we all see what's going on in the West,
yeah,
the shock of Europe vis-a-vis America, our own shock
yeah.
vis-a-vis America. um, what's your sense of how China is dealing with it? We seem to think that China's sort of standing tall, the only one with the leverage, pushed back against America successfully. How do you from Singapore, I mean, see it? And you probably see China better than anybody else.
Look, China is a country like every other. It has its strengths, it has its weaknesses.
Sure.
And its weaknesses are fairly great.
Mm.
They are economic weaknesses, or at least economic in
Structural,
manifestation. But the structural weaknesses are even deeper.
deeper.
The economic weaknesses, they are much discussed. Property market is really a Ponzi scheme,
Mm.
and therefore local governments that are up to over their head in debt,
Debt.
loss of consumer confidence,
Mm.
and therefore in inability to raise domestic consumption as a driver of
Sure.
growth and so on. We all know that, but I think these are economic symptoms of a deep structural cause. And that structural cause arises from one very fundamental fact, which is so obvious that we often don't see it. And that's China is a communist country.
That's right.
Now, I don't think it's communist in its ideology anymore. You probably find more orthodox believers in class struggle in Western universities than in the Communist Party of China.
That's true. That's
Right?
true. That's true.
Or maybe Indian universities
Yes.
too.
Yes. Oh, certainly.
Okay, but it certainly is a communist country in its political structure.
Yes.
I like to call it a Leninist state because it is run by a Leninist-style vanguard party. Now, I think we have to start from that premise. Now, China has done spectacularly well in the 1990s and the first decade of the 2000s. No doubt about that. We can't deny that, and we should not deny that. And it's by and large has been very good, not just for the Chinese people, but for most countries around. It's been one of the locomotives of world growth. But in 2012, at the 18th Party Congress, the Chinese Communist Party then acknowledged publicly that growth model that of the 1990s, early 2000s was reaching the end of its shelf life, right? And you needed a new growth model.
Yeah.
And the next year, they rolled out a new growth model in 2013 that promised a decisive role for the market in allocating resources. In other words, to put it in non-technical terms, they did all the easy part about reform already. So now they are coming to the more difficult parts where you need greater economic efficiency, market efficiency. Now, this set up a very fundamental contradiction, to use a Marxist, an internal contradiction. The primary value of a Leninist system is control, right? But more market means less control. It's not an absolute choice. It's not either A or B, but you need a new balance between the elements of control and the elements of economic efficiency.
Sure.
That new balance they have not been able to find. And indeed, after Xi Jinping, by coincidence, he came to power in 2012.
2012.
It has by and large moved in the direction of more control, with certain tactical adjustments sometimes when things get too bad towards market efficiency. Now that has set up, I think, something of a vicious cycle.
Yeah.
At the same time, because of 2 decades, 3 decades of fast growth, expectations of the Chinese people have grown enormously in all spheres. To meet those expectations, you need growth because you need money, to put it crassly. And to have growth, you have a new growth model.
Yeah.
But that growth model, a new balance between control and economic efficiency, does entail some political risk. There's no doubt about that. But that to mitigate that risk, you need growth. So you'll go round in a circle.
Yes.
And you need to break this thing at some point. So far, everything that has been done since 2012 has been generally in the direction of more control, and it's been circling around with some tactical adjustments, I said, circling around this central problem rather than confronting it.
Yeah.
Now, I think they have done very well. They have done very well in terms of technological progress and so on. Although you could argue it's still built on a foundation of Western the foundational technologies are still Western.
Yes.
The Chinese are much better at applications than you know, making fundamental breakthroughs. But they have done well. That's one part of the economy. The deep seeks, the EVs, and so on.
Yes.
But the more traditional part of the economy is not doing well.
No.
Right? It's not doing well. Youth unemployment is terribly high. Confidence of
low.
both the private sector and the general people is not very
high.
It's not higher. In fact, it's politely you can say it's plateaued, it's stagnant. And looming over all this is the demographic factor.
Yes.
Right? I don't know whether you've seen the UN studies.
Yeah.
By the end of this century, China's population may be halved.
Yes.
Now, no big country has ever gone through such a drastic demographic decline. Right? I have advised some of my Western friends, you spend a lot of time, Americans in particular, you spend a lot of time worrying about a rising China. Spare a few moments to think about a frustrated China, which may be much worse. Right?
That's an interesting thought.
You know, I don't think China is going to collapse or anything like that.
No, of course not.
But you know, it will not have the wherewithal to achieve the very ambitious plans. And you look at China, of course, it's doing well, but in cold geopolitical terms, it's not in a favorable position. In Northeast Asia, Japan, Korea, North and South, they don't trust China.
No.
In fact, the distrust of North Koreans, I heard them talk about Chinese in terms of more distrust than they talk about Americans even.
Really?
And ask them why. Then they look at me as if I'm an idiot. I probably am. And they said, America is far away. This is my neighbor. You know, they're right.
They're right.
They're right. You go down to Southeast Asia, Vietnam doesn't trust them. Indonesia is a big country.
Yeah.
It will always do what it wants. India is a big and ancient country. It's never going to subordinate itself to China. So in Southeast Asia, who can they rely on? Laos,
Cambodia, Brunei.
Even Cambodia, I'm not sure because Cambodia, Hun Sen, as long as he's around, he is quite a wily character, right?
Yes.
Cambodia, okay, but okay, let's give them Cambodia and Laos. Is that a big deal?
No.
Let's throw in Timor-Leste, and Brunei. Is that a big deal? Right? So you go to South Asia. Who they got?
Pakistan.
Pakistan, is that an asset or a liability?
Yes.
Okay, it's a problem for India because, as you said, there is strategic coordination by them.
Yes.
But Pakistan, I've told a Chinese friend, you know, and I think they're beginning to realize it, but they are stuck. This is a huge black hole in which you pour enormous amounts of money and it never fills up.
It never fills up. That's true. That's how we see it, of course.
It is not the only part of the story, but that's a big part of the story.
It's a big part of the story. Right. Now, carrying on from there, I was going through your paper on which you very provocatively called The Myth of the Asian Century. And it sort of struck me that there is so many things there that we can actually those are things that we should flag to ourselves. So for so long we have heard of first we heard about the Asian values, then we heard of the Asian century, then we also heard about Asia for Asians. The Chinese used to say that to us a long time.
That's a very dangerous idea, actually.
Yes, exactly. But to go back to your paper, can you give us a sense of why you say that this is a myth?
Well, that was being a bit provocative. I must admit that's a bit of a clickbait.
Yes, it was clickbait.
But I think there's a serious purpose. I don't deny that Asia is growing. I
Mm.
don't deny that Asia is playing a bigger role in the world, as it should.
That's right.
But what is Asia, first of all?
Yeah.
This is a very large place, and it's a very diverse place. And the fact is that we don't particularly trust each other
Yeah.
quite a lot. So, if you mean by an Asian century, there's some kind of coordinated
Yes.
entity,
Yes.
that doesn't exist.
That doesn't exist.
Now, my objection to propagating this idea of Asian century, which seems so axiomatic, nobody examines it, is that it actually has been appropriated by the Chinese.
Yes, exactly.
Right.
Exactly.
There's India, there's Japan, there's South Korea, there is Indonesia, there's Vietnam, there's even tiny little Singapore. We're all Asians too,
Yes, exactly.
Right. So and that appropriation is not innocent. It is part of a kind of Chinese influence campaign, which they have been fairly successful. I must give them that, right? Because if this century is Asian, then you must be really stupid or obtuse not to get on the right side of history, meaning get on China's side.
That's right.
So it creates a certain fatalistic cast of mind that resistance is futile. Right? So I'm just trying in that short book or pamphlet, if you like,
Yes.
to inject some complexity into this
Into
idea.
the idea. Well, I think it's doing its job, because it is forcing people to actually question this entire trope of the Asian century. No, I think it's but I also wonder whether you are also looking at whether we are looking at a reordering of the world. Certainly, we're looking at how we reassessing America, reassessing Europe. Are we reassessing in Asia in that sense, in terms of just old-fashioned power?
No, I think you have to. What is happening, and India, EU, the
Agreed.
growing relation. The agreement is, I think, a symbol of a broader, a broader thing, right?
So.
Is that you are going to have. If you're going to deal with a much more transactional America that is going to define its interests more narrowly, and it may share some interest with you, it may not share some interest with you, then you are going to have coalitions of countries, maybe 2, maybe 3, maybe 5, maybe 6, forming around particular issues where they have common interests, reforming around other issues in different combinations.
Yeah.
And you already see it in certain ways. You see it in the CPTPP.
Yeah.
You see it in the AUKUS. You see it in the Quad.
Yep.
You see it in the developing relations between India and the EU. You see it in UK joining the CPTPP, EU taking interest in the CPTPP, whether they will join or not. I'm not sure, but they are certainly taking interest. You see it in countries like Japan and Australia and South Korea taking more interest in NATO. And some NATO countries, Germany, Canada, participating in defense exercises in the
South China Sea,
in the South China Sea, or in the Asia Pacific, Indo-Pacific. You see different combinations. You see India being a member of the Quad, which I think is a significant modification of the traditional Indian foreign policy attitude.
Right. That's right.
But at the same time, you see India joining the SCO. And why
BRICS.
not? Because you have got interest in Central Asia and BRICS, right? So you're going to see a much more fluid system.
That's right.
That actually where the traditional geographical boundaries are not totally irrelevant, but are less relevant, become very porous. So I think that's what we see developing around us today. And I come back to an earlier point. Countries like India and Singapore, they have always pursued omnidirectional foreign policies, are not badly off to deal with this new kind of fluid, dynamic international order.
Right.
Provided we don't mistake the exceptional for the norm.
On that note, thank you so much, Bilahari.
Thank you for having me.